wanna live positive, it's love we give. It's how we focus on the negative and bring it back to something that we love. In fact, that's what made y'all so strong. Cause if we wanna live positive, it's love we give. It's how we focus on the negative and bring it back to something that we love. In fact, that's what made.
So my position or my experience with protesting, I think first is trying to understand the intentions behind protesting, or understanding historically with protesting. I think, like many things in this culture, the diversity of intent that goes into why people would even show up at a protest is worth understanding, and that takes conversations with people. Probing and having roundtables on people's intent, really getting to understand in a new culture where just trying to understand and have patience isn't even an attribute that you see flourishing in today's polarity culture, bipolar, polarized culture, and the argumentative nature of internet commentary, conversations and arguments and debates. The opposite of 2 ears and one mouth. So speaking twice as much as we're listening to each other. And some of that stuff is basic. You can see somebody's intent from the offset, or how it grows and escalates within a conversation if they're really trying to listen and have a meeting of the minds and communion. So why do people protest to begin with? Some people, I think nowadays, just there's angst and restlessness, discordance and hype. There's fads to it even now. But there's also good intentions of raising awareness. There's always been a staple of protest movements, getting the greater public, people outside of your community or demographic, to hear you, hear your voice, hear your sentiments, usually of some obstacle or pressure, alleged oppression that trying to overcome. So awareness as well as solutions, what can be done. If you think of the civil rights protests, movements, the freedom riders, and the sit-ins, and nonviolent activists moving to change legislation ultimately, to have, whether it's constitutional amendments, protections, the involvement of the greater collective or the state, the enforcer. So protests, historically, I understand them, I get them, and I think probably there was more effectiveness in the 60s in the civil rights and some of the initiatives that we now model our new protests off, but may not have the same impact or effectiveness or cohesiveness, true solidarity amongst those that are protesting. So in the 60s, you can argue that we saw, lots of tangible legislative change in so-called civil rights. And so that could be reason and validation enough for people to continue with the method and the strategy to make social change, social awareness. And so we move to today, and the social justice warriors and Occupy Wall Street, and some of the more recent to the Black Lives Matter and these protests that we continue to see. And what are the differences between even the Black Lives Matter to the Occupy Wall Streets to what the social justice warriors may be doing or thinking they're standing for now? Does size matter in protest? Does solidarity matter? Does polarity matter? If there's really polarized sides, two sides protesting, what's the significance? What's the effectiveness? All things that I think we should be discussing and being honest with ourselves and our community about our intentions, our experiences, our effectiveness, and how we intend to use them or not use them moving forward. So, me personally, being in my 40s, child of the 80s, I mean, born in the 70s, but cognizant and developing in the 80s, and to now, 2017, and bearing witness and observing and participating in many protests, from the old indigenous going down to the Hopi, dealing with the uranium protests, to here in Colorado, the Rocky Flats in the early 90s, arming nuclear weapons and raising awareness, and just observing what was already going on here when I got out to Colorado, with people protesting Rocky Flats and the nuclear waste and the development of the arming of the weapons. So to modern day Standing Rock, water rights, the water protectors, to the Occupy movements here locally in Colorado, of what I witnessed, to the protests of the WTO, and to the modern day Trump protests. Not that I'm a part of those, but bearing witness. And so my personal reflection on it is just having lots of frustration with the cohesiveness, the ultimate end goal effectiveness of protesting, and the groupthink that goes on, the feeling of excitement and grandiosity, which to me has been overinflated, because you can feel so charged and excited and like you're really part of something, and something political, and you're one person, but look at what the collective can do, and it's exciting. I know why people are attracted to that. That feeling. Same thing when you get into a sports arena and there's 75,000 people in one place. That's an energetic thing, and energy is powerful, and feeling part of a tribe, because we're tribal mentality people, I think, foundationally, and so we get excited when we feel like we're part of the tribe, and much less that we're powerful, and that we individually and collectively have power, when that power is going in our way. And that's what protest movements, political movements, and lots of intentional cultural goals and creations come from, to begin with, is the development of self and ideals and personal philosophies, and what we think we'd like for ourselves and our families and greater society. So these protests, though, my ultimate critique is, how do you feel united with, what's at some of these protests, thousands of people. Let's say you get 5,000 locally, or you go to one of the bigger ones, or a Million Man March, or, the anonymous marches, and some of these that really are bringing out some big numbers nowadays. And so, are you collectively having the conversations that it takes to make tangible, concrete, solid changes in your life and the life of others? And my experience with these protests is that, no, that's not happening. I have great conversations, commune and connect with great people, but the ultimate fractured diversity, that we all go back to different places, doesn't translate to a whole lot, typically. And so when I started the Freedom Movement, my project for communal change, hip-hop music, self-development, it was all about localization. And so, we started community meetings, community roundtables, where we would talk about whatever issue that anyone wanted to bring to the table, and try to prioritize the more important topics, to find a meeting of the minds and communion, and simple solutions that we're on the same page with. And I've had, I would say, 3 major attempts at doing this that were disciplined, very planned out. We started a masterminds collective, which, if you know Napoleon Hill, that's where I got the concept from. Napoleon Hill lectures, dealing with Carnegie and Ford and masterminds and changing the world and changing yourself and having big dreams and what it takes to have a meeting of the minds with more than one person, and have true communion and unity, and as well as discipline and faith and applied action, things that are mastermind principles. So, as well as visualization and meditation, holistic control of mind, body, soul, mentalism, and then applied action. So mastermind, the freedom movement, was the initiation of me trying to do community work and find meeting of the minds in general. And then more recently, the Star Tribe Alliance is a collective I'm part of, startribealliance.org. You can look it up. Trying to find solutions, land, intentional communities, new educational systems and models, localized everything, sustainable living, small footprint. And Star Tribe Alliance is the same exact thing, trying to get a collective of local people in your community, your family, your friends, on the same page for positive solutions. We have organic currency, new currency, non-debt-based currency, more barter and trade. You can look into our currency. We have Star Tribe Alliance hours here in Colorado. There's mountain hours. There's mile high hours. There were peak to peak hours, I think was the one down south. Ithaca hours out in New York, some of the models where we even developed our concept from. But intentionally trying to make change locally is the whole point. And the greater point is the connection between the protest collective mindset and what it takes to make tangible changes and talk out the complexities of what you do and do not agree about for all social constructs, communally or societally at large, which I think all stem from localized communities. So my realization is that whether it was the Freedom Movement, the Mastermind Collective, or Star Tribe Alliance, that it's very difficult to speak authentically with 2 or more people and hash out the differences in your philosophies and your ideals, as well as your motivations and your boundaries and discrepancies, discordances that offer obstacles. That's what we see in the greater world, tons of obstacles. And so I think the challenge of the protest mentality and stating our ideals as well as the obstacles we're viewing in general to reach those ideals is to, one, not confuse obstacles with oppression. Because blanket statements, I do think there's valid truth to staying very articulate with details and specifics, not just details but specifics. Extreme expressions or all-encompassing expressions, always, just things that don't allow for the variance within all statistics in the spectrum, whether you're talking about white supremacy, police violence, racism, injustice, because that gets into all the social justice warriors and what is happening, which is skewing genuine sentimental truths that people do experience that have to do with wrongdoing and injury, that aren't always a part of an institutionalized collective, but are wrong in and of themselves and deserve justice and a system to acknowledge and deal with it if it's appropriate. So that's why I hold value, and I hold this comparison between these protests that I've personally experienced and my more localized, intentional, what's my role in this, what's my community's role in this, what's our agreements and our disagreements, and what can we do here locally, starting with self, to create the change or the ideal that it is we're trying to see in this world. And with every group I've been in, it's been so difficult. Luckily, I've been in the freedom movement for 20 years plus, and my mastermind collective, although we're not active as a mastermind, we're still very close and do still aspects and parts of what mastermind represents as a whole that are still very positive and articulate things to incorporate into our everyday and collective lives together with my community that I call my family here. Star Tribe Alliance is still active, and yet all of these collectives face such diversity just within our own people. And so I think there's a misunderstanding or a glorification that are, excuse the expression, that your shit don't stink, your own shit don't stink, right? So like your family's really together, or your friends and community are really organized and on the same page. And so these macro issues we're fighting with the protests really exist on the micro, within ourselves and within some of our closest relationships with our romantic partners, our wives and our boyfriends and girlfriends and significant spiritual partners, as well as you get to the outer circles, your friends, your work associates, your social clubs and social community at large. And so protests, I think, have had a good place in society, and yet I think what they taught me is that the real work is still with self and with the people you actually know. And so it's a lot harder to fight the boogeyman out there that you've never met and never seen than it is to fight the people that you actually know. And yet the paradox is the people that you actually know, it's truly harder to so-called fight with, because you have to take accountability. You have to speak truth to the people that you have to face. You can't be behind a keyboard on a computer on a comment to somebody across the world that you'll never have to face and have accountability for what you said and how you made them feel, and if you're accurate or not accurate. So that's what I think real courage is doing things locally. That's what real maturity is doing things locally, not relying on the state and anybody else for your survival, understanding where we can use that in the system that we have, but it's certainly not owed to us as people. I think we have to keep discussing rights. The spectrum of what people believe rights are is so extreme and diverse that we should be talking about it in a positive way that helps us bridge the gaps and learn from the various perspectives in a way that benefits each of our individual perspectives. So I think we should protest at home, protest ourselves and our friends and family, in the sense that protesting should always be about positive solutions. And I think protests came as a last means when you felt like that was the only solution you had left. And that's why you would pick it, is because, sometimes, as in self-defense, violence can be the only positive solution. And it is positive to maintain longevity with self and self-perseverance. And so protecting yourself is an essential quote-unquote right. And so protest is that. It's an expression of a lower form of a culture and a society and a people at large that have discordance, that are struggling to find a way to talk about it and then find solutions. And so that's all it is. And are there better solutions? Absolutely. I think to do it locally. Have these conversations with your family, with your father. The Father that, you maybe have different spiritual beliefs, different political beliefs, Let's bring politics back to the dinner table. Let's bring religion back to the dinner table. Why are the families falling apart? Because we're struggling finding a meaning of the minds with our closest people, our families and friends. So let's find it there. The protest is just a form of the revolution, and the revolution is a love revolution. And so let's have positive, loving conversations where we inquire about what other people think, and then we share the best of what we've learned at whatever age we're at. Elders try to learn from the young ones. Young ones try to learn from the elders. They got a lot to teach you. In various cultures and social political ideologies, let's have conversations. And if yours is flawed, take from other people that have something to give you and build yours up. Knowledge is infinite, and so let's keep learning and developing each of our philosophies and our understanding of ourselves and the world. So that's my little video on protests. I think all change should start locally, with self first, with a PMA, positive mental attitude, and let's work out these differences we have with the people closest to us before we take it out to the streets, fighting some imaginary person that we may or may not specifically even know. So let's keep it specific. Let's be as specific as we can as we're tackling our differences and our similarities. Diversity is great, but it's also a struggle. And so the more peacefully we can talk about it with a good positive attitude, the more we are willing and able to find basic positive solutions that don't demand or require a big boogeyman of the state to come dominate people and force people by force and violence to be in some socialist utopia. We can just be good people and prosper in a system that when you're accountable for self and your community, there's still a lot that can happen here in America and the worldwide. So let's keep talking about our greatest, grandest vision of what we'd like to see for ourselves and each other, and see who's on board, and then try to bridge those gaps and build cool, fascinating, inspiring things that make our lives easier and more creative. So peace and love to the world. Y'all want to protest? Let me know why. Y'all doing something locally with yourself, with your community? What is it you're talking about? What's the big prioritized topics we need to figure out as a people that you are personally involved in? So hit me up. I'll tell you about the freedom movement. I'll tell you about masterminds and Star Tribe Alliance. You can look us up online. rhymesforthetimes.com, startribealliance.org, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Peace and love.
Yo, Star Tribe Alliance, it's so beautiful. We want you to know you can make a change too. Instantaneously, it could change you. Love is life, and through my poetry it came through. Yo, so never doubt it, we all about it. Love revolution, yo, that's why we shout it to the world. Man, it feels good to be alive, yo, yo. And man, it feels good to have a tribe, yo, yo. Star Tribe Alliance, and we